You ever feel like your brain is just uh, a browser with way too many tabs open? That constant inner monologue, replaying old conversations, planning for every possible future scenario. It can be exhausting, right?
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of mental overload, that relentless internal commentary, it's a universal human thing. And it's precisely where we're going to dive deep today.
Exactly.
Yep.
We've been exploring Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, and for you, our listener, consider this your express lane. We've sort of extracted the key insights, the stuff that really matters, so you can grasp his core ideas and start using them without getting totally bogged down in dense theory.
Yeah, think of it as the highlights reel, but hopefully more engaging.
Our goal in this deep dive is really to get to the heart of Tolle's message. This
Mhm.
profound idea that, you are not simply your mind, the immense power of being present, and how understanding this can be a direct path out of, well, unnecessary suffering.
We're aiming for practical wisdom, stuff you can weave into your life pretty much immediately.
Okay, let's tackle the first biggie. You are not your mind. Tolle comes right out and says that the biggest block to what he calls enlightenment is this deep-seated belief that we are our thoughts.
It's a huge perspective shift, really.
Yeah.
And Tolle uses this powerful little story to illustrate it. Imagine a beggar who's been sitting on an old wooden box for like decades.
Yep.
A
Yep.
stranger comes by and asks what's in the box. The beggar just shrugs, oh, just an old box.
Yeah.
But the stranger urges him, look inside. Guess what?
Goal.
Filled with gold.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow, that image really sticks with you, doesn't it? This person's sitting right on top of incredible value, their true nature, but completely missing it because they're so caught up in their external circumstances, their poverty.
exactly.
Mm.
It makes you wonder what we might be overlooking in our own lives by being too focused on the surface, right?
Totally.
The insight here is that we often overlook our greatest assets, our essential being, by being fixated on our perceived lack or external stuff. Tolle sees enlightenment not as some far-off spiritual prize, but as our fundamental natural state.
Like a deep feeling of connection.
Yeah, a sense of being one with something much larger and more enduring than our individual thoughts and feelings.
Hmm.
It's about recognizing who you are beyond the roles and labels you carry.
And it's when we lose touch with this underlying connection, he argues, that we create this illusion of being separate from ourselves, from others, from the world.
hmm And from that feeling of isolation naturally comes fear, anxiety, and, well, conflict. It all stems from that sense of separation.
Connecting this to our daily experience, Tolle really emphasizes how our constant mental activity fuels this sense of separation. He points to that incessant voice in your head, that ongoing, often involuntary stream of
Oh,
thoughts.
that inner commentator, the one that never seems to take a break.
Right. Tolle even makes this bold comparison to someone talking to themselves on the street. It might sound a bit jarring at first, but
Yeah, but it highlights just how much internal monologue we all have going on, usually without even realizing it's happening. It's just
yeah.
there.
The key to understanding this internal voice, Tolle says, is recognizing its characteristics. It's constantly analyzing, judging, comparing.
Speculating, worrying about the future, replaying the past.
Yeah.
It's like a mental jukebox that never stops playing, often stuck on repeat with old tunes or like anxiety-ridden forecasts.
And this voice, according to Tolle, isn't really us. It belongs to what he calls the conditioned mind. It's been shaped by all our past experiences, our personal history, but also by the collective beliefs and patterns of our culture.
So we're constantly filtering the present moment through the lens of the past, which inevitably distorts how we see things right now. It's never pure perception.
This raises an important question, though. Is this internal voice always helpful? Tolle suggests that for many, maybe most, it becomes a source of real suffering, a relentless inner critic that just drains our energy and creates significant unhappiness.
And recognizing that pattern, especially what he calls psychological time, dwelling on past negatives or future worries, is key. That's a major source of suffering in the present moment.
Okay, so as that's the core problem, this constant mental chatter and our identification with it, what's Tolle's way out? He talks a lot about cultivating consciousness and the power of simply being present.
Right. The initial step, Polly suggests, is to become aware of the thinker. It's about creating a little space between you and your thoughts, like stepping back a bit.
How does that work exactly?
Well, when you begin to observe your thoughts without judgment, just noticing them as they float by, they start to lose their grip on you. You're no longer automatically buying into every story your mind tells you.
He even describes these brief moments when thinking stops as gaps of no mind.
Yeah, At first, they might be just fleeting glimpses of stillness, but with practice, they can become more frequent and longer. And it's in these moments of quiet that we can experience a deeper sense of peace.
Which he says is our fundamental state of being, usually hidden by all the mental noise.
Exactly, that's the idea. But what's intriguing is that Tolle clarifies that this isn't about becoming like a zombie devoid of thought.
Right, not just blanking out.
No, it's about transcending the compulsive nature of thinking. In this state of presence, you can still use your mind effectively when needed for practical tasks, but you're no longer a slave to that constant, involuntary inner dialogue. There's an underlying stillness.
He even points out how this interplay between focused thought and inner stillness is crucial for creativity.
Mm.
It's like when you're wrestling with a problem, sometimes the best thing to do is step away, quiet your mind.
And when you come back to it, fresh insights can arise.
Exactly.
Thought alone, disconnected from that deeper wellspring of consciousness, can become repetitive and, frankly, unproductive.
Tolle also brings in the role of our emotions here, doesn't he?
Yes, explaining that they are essentially the body's response to the mind's interpretations. He even notes that the word emotion comes from the Latin movere, meaning to disturb.
To disturb. Interesting. So feelings like anger or sadness are often a direct reflection of what our mind is telling us about a situation.
Pretty much. But he also says that true love, joy, and peace exist on a deeper level, beyond the realm of just fluctuating emotions.
Mm-hmm.
To access that deeper level, though, we first need to be aware of our emotions, to acknowledge them without getting swept away.
And this connects directly to his idea of how resisting the present moment creates pain. On a mental level, this resistance shows up as judgment.
And on an emotional level as negativity.
Yeah.
The more we're identified with our minds, the more we resist what is, and consequently, the more we suffer. It's almost like a formula.
He then introduces this idea of the pain body. It sounds a bit intense. What's the core of that concept?
Think of the pain body as an accumulation of unresolved past emotional pain. It can lie dormant within us like a sleeping volcano and then periodically erupt.
Erupt how?
Well, it can manifest as irritability, impatience, a gloomy mood, sudden anger, or even a subconscious need for drama in our relationships. It's basically the stored up energy of past hurts.
Okay, so when this pain body flares up, what does Tolle suggest we do? Just write it out.
No, not exactly. The crucial insight is to observe it without judgment the moment you feel it activating. Simply notice the sensations in your body, acknowledge the feelings without labeling or getting lost in the story attached to them.
So just do watch it.
Yes. This act of witnessing creates a separation. You become the observer, the watcher, rather than being consumed by the pain. This prevents the pain body from taking over and perpetuating the cycle of suffering. You access the power of now, of presence.
He says that this conscious awareness actually transforms the pain body, right? Like light dissolving darkness.
That's the core idea.
Yeah.
Just by being present with it, accepting it as part of this moment, we can begin to heal it. Trying to suppress it or fight it only adds more fuel to the fire.
So watching it, allowing it, that's the key.
That's the key to its eventual transmutation. Tolle emphasizes that this simple act of being the present watcher is incredibly powerful. However, he also points out that there can be strong inner resistance to this.
Why? Why would we resist feeling better?
Well, especially if we've been carrying this emotional baggage for a long time, our sense of self can become intertwined with it. It's like we've built an identity around our pain.
And there's a subconscious fear that letting go of it means losing a familiar, even if unpleasant, sense of self.
Wow, exactly. And this brings us to the role of the ego. Tolle explains that as long as we're primarily identified with our minds, the ego is essentially running the show. And because the ego's sense of self is based on illusion, it feels inherently insecure and constantly perceives threats.
Even when they aren't real threats.
Often when they aren't real. And because our emotions are often a direct response to our thoughts, this constant underlying feeling of threat from the ego can manifest as a lot of unnecessary fear in our bodies.
And the ego needs validation, right?
Constantly. It needs external validation and identification to feel real. Our possessions, our jobs, our social standing, our knowledge, our appearance, relationships, personal history, beliefs, collective identities.
The list goes on.
It does. But Tolle stresses that none of these things are who we truly are at our core.
The ego sounds like it has an insatiable appetite. It's always searching for something to latch onto to prop up its shaky sense of self.
And it even clings to our problems, which explains why some people seem to define themselves by their struggles and resist letting them go, because that would feel like a loss of identity.
That's a crucial insight. There can be a significant, often unconscious, investment in our pain and suffering from the ego's perspective.
Definitely. Which all leads us back to the central idea of the power of now. Tolle really challenges our obsession with the past and the future, suggesting that the present moment is the only reality we ever actually have.
He poses a very direct question, doesn't he? Have you ever actually experienced anything outside of the present moment? Will you ever?
Exactly. Think about it. Every thought, every feeling, every experience happens now. So why do we give so much power to what is no longer here or what hasn't happened yet?
It really makes you pause. Intellectually, we might understand that the present is all we ever truly have, but Tolle says that mental understanding isn't enough.
No, it requires a fundamental shift in our consciousness, moving from being identified with our minds and our preoccupation with time to recognizing our deeper being and the immense power inherent in simply being present.
And when that happens, he says, life takes on a new vibrancy, a feeling of aliveness.
Tolle points out that in life-threatening situations, this shift to intense present awareness often happens automatically. The usual concerns about the past and future just fade away.
Yeah, you're just totally focused.
Totally focused, alert presence. Our actions in those moments arise directly from that state. It's like those stories you hear about people exhibiting incredible clarity and acting instinctively in crises.
He even suggests that some people are drawn to risky activities precisely because they force them into the now.
Right, into that intensely alive state where thinking takes a backseat to pure awareness. But he emphasizes that we don't need extreme circumstances to access this state. We can cultivate it right now.
He then introduces the Zen concept of living on the razor's edge of now, being so completely present that any suffering or problem that isn't fundamentally part of who we are simply can't take root.
Suffering, he says, needs time to exist. It can't survive in the pure now.
And he shares that thought-provoking question from the Zen master Rinzai. What at this moment is lacking? It's a powerful way to draw our attention fully into the present, isn't it?
It really is. Tolle cautions, however, that just catching a glimpse of this timeless dimension isn't sufficient. What's needed is a more sustained shift in consciousness.
So practice.
Practice. He advises us to actively practice withdrawing our attention from the past and the future whenever they're not practically necessary, to consciously step out of that time dimension as much as possible in our daily lives.
He suggests that if we find it difficult to enter the now line directly, we can start by observing our mind's constant urge to escape it, by either replaying the past or fantasizing about a better or worse future. Both are ultimately illusions.
And through the simple act of self-observation, more presence will naturally begin to enter our experience. It's about noticing the habit first.
It's crucial then to distinguish between what Tolle calls clock time, the practical use of time for schedules and planning,
Which is necessary, obviously.
right, and psychological time, which is our tendency to get caught up in regrets and resentments about the past or anxieties and worries about the future. Psychological time, Tolle explains, is always tied to a false sense of self and is a major source of our suffering.
Holding on to resentment, for example, keeps us trapped in the past. Worrying constantly keeps us lost in a future that hasn't happened.
He even uses the strong term insanity to describe the collective manifestations of psychological time, pointing to rigid ideologies that sacrifice the well-being of the present for some idealized future.
Often leading to immense suffering in the process. Yeah.
What's a really practical takeaway here is the simple test Tolle offers for recognizing when we've slipped into psychological time: a lack of joy, ease, and a sense of lightness in whatever we're doing.
That's a great litmus test. If those are absent, it's a good indicator that we're no longer truly in the present moment and that our minds are likely caught up in the past or future.
But he says even if we can't change what we're doing in a given moment, we can always change how we're doing it.
How so?
By bringing our full attention to the present task, to the act itself rather than just the desired outcome, and by fully accepting what is, because you can't truly focus on something you're mentally resisting.
Right, that makes sense. Tolle then explores different levels of unconsciousness. He suggests that most people fluctuate between ordinary unconsciousness, being largely identified with their thoughts and emotions, experiencing a low-level sense of unease or dissatisfaction that feels almost normal.
Like a baseline hum of discontent.
Kind of. And deeper states of unconsciousness, which might involve stronger negative emotions or even the use of substances as a way to numb the underlying discomfort.
So the key, he says, is to cultivate more awareness in those ordinary, seemingly mundane moments, not just during crises. He says this strengthens our ability to be present.
Creating a kind of inner resilience that negativity can't easily penetrate, just like light naturally dispels darkness. Yeah. When we begin to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment, we might be surprised to notice how often we're not truly at peace within ourselves.
There's often a subtle undercurrent of judgment, discontent, or worry.
Exactly. Tolle connects this collective resistance to the way, now to a fundamental disconnect from our deeper being, and a contributing factor to the unhappiness and conflict we see in the world around us.
He makes a powerful point that when we resist what is, we essentially make the present moment our enemy, creating inner turmoil and also contributing to conflict in our external world.
Regarding accepting negative emotions, Tolle clarifies that while initially acknowledging them is important to avoid acting them out unconsciously, the ultimate aim is to move beyond them through genuine non-resistance and non-judgment.
If we truly believed that everything in this moment is as it should be, as he puts it, those negative feelings wouldn't arise in the first place.
That's the radical acceptance part. He also talks about how constantly dwelling on the past, whether it's positive memories or old grievances, actually reinforces a false sense of self and can even accelerate the aging process.
Wow. His advice is to die to the past in every moment and to focus on the creative power of the now. And worry, he reminds us, is simply the mind projecting into an imagined future, creating fear.
The antidote is always to bring our attention back to the present, to our breath, to our physical sensations, to the inner body,
He defines waiting as essentially wanting the future to be different from the present, creating inner conflict and causing us to miss the richness of the current moment.
which is different from setting goals, right?
Right. While it's perfectly natural to have goals and work towards improving our circumstances, the pitfall is using those future aspirations as a way to avoid or devalue the present. Our deepest sense of life and being is only accessible in the now.
He draws a distinction between our inner purpose, which is the awakening to presence itself, and our outer purpose, our goals and activities in the world.
He suggests that outer purpose can become a joyful game once we've connected with our inner purpose. Outer success doesn't guarantee inner peace.
And it's even possible to experience outer setbacks while maintaining inner equilibrium. Ultimately, all outer achievements are temporary, subject to change.
Well said. The sooner we recognize that lasting fulfillment can't be solely derived from external achievements, the freer we become to truly enjoy the present journey.
So true.
So how do we actually access this power of now? Tolle introduces the concept of portals to presence, like doorways.
Yes, exactly. These are essentially doorways to the unmanifested, the deeper realm of being that underlies all forms. He identifies the now itself as the primary and most crucial portal, essential for accessing all the others.
Okay, the now is portal number one. And another key portal is the inner body, right? It talks about consciously directing our attention inward.
Feeling the subtle energy field, the aliveness within our physical form, emphasizing the direct sensation rather than intellectualizing it, just feeling it.
It's fascinating how Tolle views the relationship between consciousness and form. He suggests that consciousness initially expressed itself through forms, leading to our identification with these forms, the egoic mind, and the subsequent fear of losing them.
And it's the pressure of suffering arising from this perceived separation that ultimately pushes consciousness to disidentify from form and awaken to its deeper nature. Suffering becomes the catalyst.
He also highlights the profound power of silence as a vehicle for presence, not just the absence of external noise, but becoming aware of the underlying stillness.
Yeah, the stillness that exists between and beneath sounds, between and beneath our thoughts. He says tuning into this silence creates an inner quiet and connects us to pure consciousness.
It's important not to get fixated on the labels we use for these deeper realities, though. Tolle cautions against getting caught up in religious or philosophical terms if they trigger mental judgments or create rigid concepts.
Right. The key is to look beyond the words to the underlying ineffable reality they point to. If a particular word creates resistance, he suggests simply choosing another that resonates more, like being or presence instead of God, if that helps.
And going back to the inner body, he offers a practical way to connect with it through focused attention and sensing its energy. He even refers to the idea that while our physical body appears to be a solid, separate entity, it's actually a manifestation of a deeper reality.
By feeling the aliveness within, we can begin to reconnect with that underlying being. It's always there, just usually unfelt.
Tolle also discusses the creative interplay between our thinking mind and this inner sense of being. When we need a solution or a fresh idea, he suggests momentarily pausing our mental chatter.
Focusing on that inner stillness and then allowing thoughts to arise from that deeper place. It's about finding a balance between active thinking and receptive inner listening, not just forcing it,
And he talks about the art of truly listening, not just with our ears and our minds, but with our whole being, sensing the inner energy field within ourselves and the person we're listening to.
This creates a space of stillness that allows us to hear beyond the words, to perceive the other person's essential being, fostering a sense of deep connection and understanding, which he equates with love.
He even describes how deeply focusing our attention on the inner body can lead to a profound experience where the world as we know it seems to momentarily dissolve into the unmanifested and then re-emerge.
Whoa.
Yeah. Consciousness directed inward recognizes its source. Directed outward, mind and the world arise. Experiencing this even fleetingly can be fundamentally transformative.
He mentions other portals as well, like surrender the act of letting go of our mental and emotional resistance to what is and space, becoming aware of the empty space around and within us, which can lead to a direct experience of no mind.
And he clarifies that love itself isn't a portal, but rather the natural expression of presence that flows through these gateways.
Got it. And even nothingness, when not intellectually conceptualized, can become a portal. Space and silence are outward reflections of our inner spaciousness and stillness.
Most people, identified solely with the realm of form, are unaware of this deeper dimension, leading to feelings of fear and misinterpretation of reality. Tolle suggests that the world exists as a means for the unmanifested to become consciously realized through us.
That's a deep thought.
So, what happens when we start to live more consistently from this place of presence? He talks about transformation through presence. What does that look like?
Well, on a psychological level, Tolle explains that the feeling of lack and incompleteness is far more pronounced when we're identified with our minds and an externally defined sense of self. The ego's constant striving for more never brings lasting satisfaction. It's a bottomless pit.
But he emphasizes that the light of presence is absolutely essential for true love to flourish, allowing us to recognize ourselves as the underlying being, beneath the surface noise of our thoughts and the weight of our past pain.
He defines God, or being, as the eternal, unified life force that underlies all forms, and love as the feeling of that same life presence within ourselves and within all other beings. True love, he says, isn't selective or exclusive.
That kind of possessiveness is a manifestation of the ego, right?
Exactly. He uses the example of unconsciousness in relationships to illustrate how every conflict, every challenge, can actually be a catalyst for awakening.
How so?
By consciously becoming present and observing our own reactions, our pain body activating, our mental emotional patterns, we create a space of pure awareness that can transmute the pain, both in ourselves and potentially in the relationship.
Tolle points out that even events we perceive as negative contain a deeper wisdom. From a higher perspective, conditions are neither inherently good nor bad. They simply are.
True acceptance leads to a state beyond the duality of positive and negative. He even quotes Marcus Aurelius on the importance of accepting what life brings, what destiny has for us.
It sounds like suffering itself can be a powerful, albeit often unwelcome, force that compels us to let go of our resistance and awaken to our deeper being through forgiveness.
Yeah, he even suggests that what we perceive as evil, from our limited viewpoint, plays a part in a larger unfolding that can lead to a greater good realized through forgiveness. It's a challenging idea.
By allowing the fundamental isness of all things, a deeper dimension of abiding presence, stillness, and joy that exists beyond the play of opposites begins to reveal itself the inherent joy of being.
While the world of form is characterized by constant change, by cycles of birth and death, our essential being remains constant, unchanging.
He shares a particularly poignant example of an aging actress who experienced deep unhappiness because she had so completely identified with her external beauty.
Oh, I remember that part.
He suggests that if she had cultivated a connection with the formless essence within, she could have witnessed the natural process of aging with serenity and even experienced a different kind of beauty, a spiritual radiance.
He recounts the profound realization of a Buddhist monk. All that arises passes away. This fundamental understanding, this non-resistance to the impermanent nature of life, brings a sense of grace, ease, and lightness.
And interestingly, when our inner sense of self is no longer dependent on external forms, outer circumstances often improve naturally. It's like we stop creating resistance.
Yeah, the happiness we seek from external sources is always fleeting compared to the deep, abiding joy of being found in non-resistance.
So how do we actually integrate all this into our everyday lives? What are some practical steps we can take? This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
Totally. Toll advises us to simply observe any plant or animal. They embody a deep acceptance of what is, a complete surrender to the present moment, and a natural expression of being. They just are.
He uses that charming example of ducks getting into a squabble and then immediately releasing that energy by flapping their wings.
And then they just swim off peacefully. A natural wisdom that doesn't involve a mind holding on to past grievances. They don't write angry emails later.
Huh. Right. He interprets the biblical teaching of turn the other cheek not as a literal act, but as a symbolic representation of inner non-resistance and non-reaction.
They shift in focus from the external event to our internal state. And he shares the insightful story of Banzan's enlightenment upon hearing the butcher's simple reply, "Every piece of meat I have is the best."
Which illustrates the power of fully embracing the present reality, whatever it may be, accepting the isness.
Exactly. He explains how cultivating presence can transform negative interactions and unconscious behavior. By staying anchored in our being, we can perceive the radiant essence in others, even when their egoic patterns are dominant.
And this awareness naturally gives rise to compassion.
Yes. He describes compassion as having two facets, recognizing our shared vulnerability on the level of form, and also recognizing our shared eternal life on the level of being. We're connected on both levels.
Contemplating the impermanence of physical forms can lead to a deeper realization of that deathless dimension within us.
He uses a beautiful analogy of mistaking an angel for a stone statue. The divine is already present all around us and within us. We simply need to adjust our perception to recognize it. It's not hidden, we're just not seeing it.
Regarding the question of why animals experience death if they don't have ego or a concept of death, Tolle explains that our perception of the world is a direct reflection of our state of consciousness.
So a fundamental belief in separation leads to a world perceived as one of struggle and mortality.
That's the idea. Interestingly, he points out that modern physics is increasingly supporting the interconnectedness of observer and observed, which aligns with this perspective.
He suggests that the current state of our world largely reflects the dominance of the egoic mind, driven by fear and separation. A fundamental inner shift in human consciousness will have a ripple effect on all of creation.
Leading to what he calls a new Earth, a transformation in planetary awareness. Our primary task, he says, isn't just to try and fix the external world, but to awaken from our identification with form. That's the root.
While working to alleviate suffering in the world is undoubtedly a noble endeavor, it needs to be balanced with an awareness of the eternal nature of life and the ultimate illusory nature of pain from that higher perspective.
True and lasting change originates from within. Tolle suggests that the most profound contribution we can make is to embody and teach enlightenment, addressing the root cause, and to offer peace through our presence.
He clarifies that surrender isn't about passive resignation in the face of unpleasant circumstances, but rather an active acceptance of the now. He uses that analogy of being stuck in mud.
Right. First, you acknowledge and accept the reality of being stuck without judgment, and then you can take positive steps to get yourself out. Acceptance first, then action.
Surrender, he says, is not the end of action, but rather a different way of acting, infused with the energy of being, making it a joyful expression of life rather than a struggle against it. Non-resistance actually enhances the effectiveness and the quality of our actions.
He even addresses the challenging topic of non-resistance in the face of violence, explaining that it doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing externally, but rather acting from a place of non-reactivity, grounded in presence.
Like Eastern martial arts.
Kind of, yeah. He alludes to the Taoist concept of wu wei, or effortless action, which arises from inner non-resistance and deep alertness. He also suggests that in moments of intense presence, doing nothing can be a powerful force for transformation.
Tolle encourages us to become inner alchemists, transmuting the lead of suffering into the gold of consciousness through the power of our presence. He points out that when illness becomes a key part of our identity,
It's often a sign that the ego is trying to protect itself and the illness. Our true self transcends the label of illness.
he discusses how extreme situations, disastrous loss, intense suffering can sometimes crack open the ego and force a state of surrender and awakening. He shares that powerful example of individuals on death row finding a deep sense of peace through that forced acceptance.
Wow. When there seems to be no way out of pain, Tully emphasizes that there is always a way through it.
Oh.
By fully feeling the sensations without adding mental labels or creating a victim narrative, complete attention to the raw feeling is itself an act of surrender, bringing the power of presence that dissolves both time and the associated suffering.
He connects the concept of the way of the cross to this idea of surrender through intense suffering. But he clarifies that finding God isn't about discovering an external entity, but realizing the inherent being that we already are.
The way of the cross, he suggests, remains a potent path to enlightenment for those who experience profound suffering.
Tolle contrasts this path of enlightenment, through suffering often a forced surrender, with the path of consciously chosen enlightenment,
Which is?
willingly relinquishing our attachment to the past and future, intentionally focusing on the present now, and saying yes to whatever arises in this moment. He leaves us with a powerful and direct question. How much more pain do we need to experience before we consciously make that choice?
Oof, that's quite the question. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the power of now, the central message that really shines through is the incredible potential of presence.
Yeah, by learning to disidentify with the relentless chatter of our minds and fully embracing the present moment through acceptance, we unlock a direct pathway to overcoming unnecessary suffering and connecting with our deepest, most authentic selves.
And remember, this exploration wasn't just a general overview, it was specifically for you, our listener, to provide practical and hopefully immediately applicable insights.
This leads to a final thought for you to consider. As you reflect on our conversation, which of these portals to presence, perhaps the now itself, the inner body, the power of silence, the practice of surrender, or the awareness of space, which one resonates most strongly with you right now?
And maybe what's one small concrete step you could take today to cultivate a little more presence in your own life, even just noticing your breath for a minute?
Absolutely. This is truly just the beginning of a fascinating and potentially transformative journey, and we really encourage you to continue exploring these profound ideas.